So with us now, you'll hear from Irfan Hasan, Program Director at the New York Community Trust, Dr. Tim Lisante, Superintendent, New York City Department of Education, and Audrey Wilson, Senior Director at the New York City Department of Probation. So very excited to have all of you with us today, and look forward to the conversation ahead. And so we'll just jump right in. The same sort of get to know you question that we had to open our last group. I'll just ask you about your role, your organization, and more broadly, how you see your sector's influence in this particular task at hand. Yeah, and we'll start with you.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Irfan, and thank you, Angela, for inviting me. I work for the New York Community Trust. Some of you may have heard of it. It is a foundation, a grant-making foundation, and we support a whole range of projects from early childhood to workforce to after-school programming to biomedical research. And although we don't have a particular area around addressing violence against children and adolescents, I would say it is woven through the theme of our healthcare grant-making, which I oversee, and our human services grant-making and our education-related grant-making. So that's sort of our organization, and in terms of how we fit into the broader sector, I'd say we are a important but small component, because all we do is provide some of the flexible money for organizations to innovate, to experiment, and to really develop the best practices. A lot of the other work is obviously done by individuals in the field on the ground. But I do think philanthropy in general does play that little critical role. And I think for issues around addressing violence in kids and adolescents, it's particularly important, because we have to always think about there's got to be a better way to do this, to prevent it, and, well, to address it if it's happening and to prevent it from happening. So that's sort of what I'd say in my opening comments.
Thank you.
I don't know if this slide's going to come up, but hi, I was trained in 1970s, back in the 1900s, to be a special ed teacher. There it is. All right. And in the 70s, a lot of interesting things happened here in New York City. One is the drug culture exploded, and the Rockefeller drug laws were passed, which broke up a lot of families. Manufacturing jobs dried up here in the city. The Vietnam War wound down, which cut down some options. And what happened in our world in education was the dropout rate started to rise. So this was a bad thing, right? You had dropout rate rising, and opportunities for dropouts no longer existed. You needed a high school diploma, and eventually now college to get a job. So New York City, to its credit, opened the first alternative school district in America in 1983. And those are some of the programs that were there in 1983, and they still exist today. And I'm the superintendent of this district. And the first program I want to mention is the LIFE program. This is early childhood education for student parents. So if you're a student and you're a parent, you're entitled to free child care through our LIFE program. This is quality child care, and every student parent gets a social worker. And the social worker helps with the parenting skills, but also helps navigate resources in the community and navigate the school system. And I'm proud to say we're going to have over 100 student parents graduate in June who have babies in the LIFE centers here in New York City. They're located within high schools. We have 35 of them across all 5 boroughs. And they really have to collaborate closely with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, right? There's all kinds of parameters in which these centers have to operate under, and also with ACS. They have a tight relationship with the ACS folks. So we're really proud of the LIFE program. It started by one principal saying, bring your babies to school, we'll look after them, and you graduate. It was part of the women's movement in the 1980s under Mayor Koch. And like I said, it was really babysitting back then, but now it's really quality early childhood education. And who's more at risk than a baby of a student parent and most of our student parents are in poverty. Some live in mother-child residence. So again, Early intervention starts at 8 weeks. The babies can come to us at 8 weeks. And now with universal pre-K, they can stay in the New York City public school system until they graduate at 18. So we love the LIFE program. The second program we also love is Restart Academy. Our district started the first school located in drug treatment, adolescent drug treatment, Phoenix Academy, which is a partnership with Phoenix House. Today, Restart Academy embeds teachers into 17 different drug treatment, adolescent drug treatment centers here in New York City, and we have a couple upstate for kids in residential. And one of them I wanted to highlight real quickly, it's a partnership with Mount Sinai. It's called CARES, Comprehensive Adolescent Rehabilitation Education Services. It's over by Columbia University. And this is for students that have internal behavior disorders, anxiety, stress, depression, and they turn to drugs, and now they have this co-occurring disorder. And CARES is a great model. What it does is it integrates the group therapy and the individual counseling throughout the school day. So we embed teachers there, right? In the morning, they have a group session. Then they have 3 periods of academics. Then they have another group session. And then they have lunch. They have 2 more periods of academics. And at the end of the day, they have after school and more group counseling. So it's a great mix between therapy and academics. And the last one I want to talk about is the juvenile justice. As Wynette said before, we run the schools on Rikers Island. I was the principal there. I taught there for 10 years. And we're so proud that finally they're going to raise the age of criminality. So we're primed right now to move those students in October into Passages Academy, which is our school in collaboration with ACS. This is a school for students that are 15 and under. So we have a bifurcated system here in New York. Passages Academy serves students that are court involved that are 15 and under, right? And East River Academy is on Rikers Island for students 16 to 21. And I'm very proud to say that this is the 5th year of the Close to Home project here in New York City. I don't know if you're familiar with that. 6 years ago, when a student was found guilty of a juvenile offense, they would be sent upstate, 200 miles from their homes, for 6 months. Again, one of the first things Governor Cuomo did was he closed that program down, and we keep New York City kids in New York City right now. And it took us a long time to really evolve this program called Close to Home. It's a partnership with ACS. It's a partnership with community providers that are foster care providers like Good Shepherd, SCO, and Foundling, and everybody else. And just recently, we were asked by the U.S. Department of Education to do a webinar on the educational piece of Close to Home and juvenile justice for people across the country. So those are some of the things in our district that I wanted to highlight today.
Hello. First, I'm just going to apologize in advance for speaking very quickly. I promise to slow down, and you'll understand me partially into my presentation. So I'm Audrey Wilson. I'm the Senior Director at the Department of Probation for Juvenile Operations. And I'll just talk a little bit about probation because often we're confused with parole. Specifically juvenile probation, we have a very unique role in the justice system. Many say it's the front door because we are the first step after a young person is arrested. They come to our offices and we perform what we call intake. We interview all parties, including the young person and their family, and then we provide a decision as to whether or not that case should go for formal prosecution or be granted a period of adjustment, which is 60 up to 120 days. And at the conclusion, that young person doesn't have a record. If that case does penetrate farther into the system and goes to court and there's a finding, we perform the investigation. We're arm of the court. We perform an investigation and report, and we write a psychosocial for the judge and make a recommendation as to whether or not we think that the young person would be a match for community supervision or would benefit from out-of-home placement. I'm happy to report that 20 years ago when I started at the Department of Probation, we were overly reliant on out-of-home placement, sending up to 1,600 youth out of the home. I am happy to report that that number is below 500. And the way we do that is that we have changed the way that we engage youth and their families. For one, we have a more strength-based role in assessing as to what whether or not young people would benefit for community supervision. We divert up to 30% of the cases that come before us at intake. That's one of the highest diversion rates that we've had since we've been there. It's about 28, 29. And what that means is that we work with those young people for 60 days, monitoring, and we do a light touch. For those who have had no history or that come before us, we may see them, monitor them, their attendance at school, and that may be it. For other young people that require a little bit more services, there's also interactive journaling, groups, and other programming that they can avail themselves of. So again, I like to talk about my role as programs, over programs and new initiatives. In that role, I oversee alternative to programming, alternative to placement programming. That's our highest, that's supervision for our highest risk youth. I think I would say one of the best jobs at the Department of Probation, other than the commissioner, is that I get to create opportunities for client engagement. Our probation officers are actively working with young people in the community, and our role is unique and also complex, right? We'll wear a law enforcement hat, and we wear what others think is a social work hat. But how we bring it together is no matter what hat you think fits best, you can't look at a 15-year-old that has come before you and not want the best, the absolute best for them, whether they have been arrested once and sometimes twice. We always keep community safety is our highest, is what we hope to attain, but we recognize that, some young people have found their way into the justice system for a reason. So we work hard at client engagement, right? And that looks very different than years ago. Our probation officers are out there working with young people and their families like never before. I have a campaign of what I call the Remove the Desk campaign, in that every opportunity, and let's not think we didn't throw away all our desks, but what we did was we moved officers into the community to work with young people intimately. There is nothing that we like more is to be out in the field and and working with our young people in a more intimate way. We found that the desk is a barrier, right? All the questions that, when somebody shows up for an appointment or an interview, they put on their persona to answer the questions, most likely what you want to hear. We found that observing our young people in the community when they're at school, when they're participating in program, that we are better suited to develop those strength-based individual action plans. No more boilerplate programming. One size fit one. No program or action plan looks like one another. We work very hard to make sure that parents are at the table. Our parent outreach, when I started 20 years ago, parents were many times observers in the process, right? We had the magic. We were going to fix everything. And then we recognized that even if you had the best PO for 365 days, that kid would ultimately be dependent on their family. And we recognized that. So we embarked on our parent engagement piece. So we say that, some parents are in it from day one. Some parents have to be held by the hand and brought to the table, but regardless as to how we do it, we make sure that parents are involved. And one way, we have parent coaches. We have credible messengers that may have gone through the system or had a child that have gone through juvenile justice. They have a story to tell. So they make sure that we make sure that they're available to help our parents and our young people. And that's part of the partnerships we have with the community. So that's just an overview of some of the programming and some of the things that we're doing at the Department of Probation.
Thank you so much to each of you. You each have done this work in very specific ways, and it is long work. And you acknowledge that. But we have made progress and we have seen change. And in social change work, it seems that there is a pendulum that swings oftentimes even with economic growth and economic contraction, that when there is economic growth, it's all about innovation, there's new money, there's opportunity to do things differently, throw things up against a wall, see what sticks. It's not really that reckless, but to innovate. And then as there's contraction, it's collaboration, right? Do more with less. Find ways to work together. Use fewer resources to achieve the same goals. So in your experience and in the work that you've done, how do innovation and collaboration fit into the necessary components for ending violence against children? And is this a problem that can be solved?
I guess while I think the characterization that we do kind of swing a bit is accurate. The reality, I think, is that for this type of work, we're all in it for the long haul. And while in times of plenty, although I doubt that there is ever plenty where resources, at least in terms of resources for issues like this. But in times of having some resources, one might try out different things and you might try to innovate a bit, and obviously you need to hunker down other times. But I think from our perspective and my perspective is just from a foundation that works with dozens of grantees across the city in a whole variety of programs, I'd say there's always a fine balance of innovation and collaboration, and one feeding the other. And before coming here today, earlier in the week, I just looked back at over the past probably 12 months, we've supported several different efforts, but I kind of picked up about 4 efforts that kind of combine this idea of you've got to innovate and you've got to collaborate. And just looking across at the groups that we've worked with, that seems to be the recipe for success. So, whether it was supporting the Adolescent Health Center here in terms of their work, Mount Sinai's Adolescent Health Center in terms of their work, working with kids who've been trafficked and making sure that they get the care they need and an understanding they need around some very basic health services. Nothing fancy, just keep them safe, keep them growing, and support them. Very, very critical. All the way from that to perhaps pushing the edge a little bit more with a community group. It's called Black Women's Blueprint in Brooklyn. Some of you may have heard of it, maybe people from the organization, that is really looking to provide a combination of advocacy for victims, for children, for adolescents and children who suffered trauma and abuse, to looking at very practical issues of making sure that there's housing for individuals as they might be fleeing a abusive situation, group called New Destiny, for New Destiny housing, to making sure that those who work with these children are trained in the best practices. There's an organization called Day One, and we've been supporting them in making sure that social workers across the area, not just those who focus in on adolescents only, are trained to be able to work with folks. So I think it's a combination of you kind of make sure that there's capacity, you build the capacity. There's always advocacy to improve, advocacy for resources, always support, an effort to support best practice and best practice expansion, and ultimately trying to make sure that you can reduce the numbers of kids who end up in this situation, so prevention and reduction. So I'd say it's sort of a bit of everything.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you.
I think the resources have always been here, I think, in New York City. I think the coordination of those resources was what's key. What's worked with us is to have formal meetings with our partners every month. I say to my principals, I have 12 principals, and they say, oh yeah, we meet all the time, and we say hello. No, I said, no, you must schedule formal meetings every month so things don't fester, and those meetings have to be based in data. I'm really, really happy because the Board of Ed, the good news is I control the money in our district as superintendent. The bad news is I don't have that much money, but I never will get more unless I come with data. And this year alone, this last year, the Regents results, the Regents are state exams, they're marked in other schools. The Regents results went up in juvenile justice. More students took them and more students passed them. So both the N and the percentage went up. On Rikers Island, more students passed the high school equivalency test, which is marked in Indiana. It's an 8-hour test, it's 5 subjects, Common Core line. So our students are passing assessments that are statewide and national. When I bring that to the Board of Ed, then I can make a case and say, hey, we did this here, give us a little bit more money and we can expand. So I think those things are key. Formal partnership meetings all the time, communicating, and then having the data to when you want to go. Otherwise, we have to just do things that are cost neutral. What I tell my principals, yeah, you can do that, but you're not going to get any money until you can show us some positive outcomes.
Great, thank you.
So innovation and collaboration, I believe, is essential to achieve any success. And I say that because we have done our best work through collaborations. The two I want to speak about just happen to involve the Administration for Children's Services, and it's our crossover youth model. That model has helped us to reduce the duplication of services, right? The young person is within the child welfare system and gets arrested. And prior to the crossover youth model, we were working with each family as if we didn't know that they were involved in both divisions. Once we embarked on this initiative, we reduced the duplication of services, and we were able to utilize the strengths of each agency to the benefit of the family. We spoke with one voice, and each agency was aware of what the other agency's goals were for that family. The family didn't necessarily have to go back and forth and tell their story twice. Unfortunately, families and young people that are involved in both systems often have to tell the same story 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This opportunity to converse with our sister agency has definitely relieved some of the stress that is placed on the family. Another collaboration we have is our weekend and evening intake programs. I'm not sure if you knew, prior to May 2008, young people that were arrested on a Friday night, and if Monday were a holiday and they were detained, they stayed, if they were arrested after court hours, stayed in detention, even though they might have been eligible, for release, meaning they could have been their first offense, they had a parent or a resource at home that was willing to take them in, because there was no means to have that young person released to their homes. With weekend and evening arraignment, a young person sees a probation officer, has their intake out after hours, and if they are arrested and they're in the system at 2 o'clock in the morning and their parent come pick them up, ACS can transport that young person home to their family. This is a huge saving. A young person does not have to stay in detention no longer. And one, it helps reduce the adverse reactions that a young person experiences being separated from their family. So we're really, those two agencies, those two initiatives, weekend arraignment and evening intake, has helped to reduce the number of young people that stay in detention when it's not necessary.
Great, fantastic. And so you all passed the quiz. Yes, we can attain this goal, and we can do it through using both collaboration and innovation. So if we all agree in that sense, what support is needed to promote and facilitate those innovations that lead to scalable solutions? How do you build those networks for collaboration? And are there lessons learned that you have that maybe others don't have to learn because of the insight that you've gleaned that you can share with us today. And maybe we'll start with Audrey this time, just to change things up a little bit.
Again, creative innovation and creative out-of-the-box thinking. Setting realistic goals that benefit both the system as well as the families in which we serve. And I say that because, you know, a lot of emphasis is placed on the Department of Probation when we're supervising and working with a young person, right? The goal is no rearrest, right? We want to ensure public safety. But the primary goal is giving the family and the young person what they need. Ultimately, if we work with them in a meaningful way, ultimately that will definitely translate into lower arrest rates. So I think having realistic goals that can be built upon, starting small and then building on top as a system. And when I say the system, because they come in contact, right, with you know, PD, ACS, probation, and if we're all speaking with one voice, then that will help us move to where we need to be. The other thing is I wanted to say is what we learned again, and I've heard people say it about parents. And, you know, there are parents and then there are parents, right? There's some people that come ready, able to work for the success of their young person to get them in and out of the system. And then some parents are not there yet. And I think we give up on parents sometimes, right? Because we don't think that they're able to do what they have to do to help their young person, but we have to help them to get ready. It's similar, I mean, I heard somebody tell me, and I think it makes absolute good sense. It's similar to the airline theory that you put on your own, your mask for air first before you put on your young person, your kid, or whoever you're traveling with. So sometimes we have to help parents first, right? So that they're able to help their young person go through the system. And I think, you know, a lot of times, and I say this over again, and we have to learn as an agency, you know, as an agency that we can't do it all. And our biggest partner should always be the family and the community, because they know and they're there when we're not. So if we can increase reliance on families and the community, I think that will lead to better outcomes and solutions.
Fantastic, thank you. Who'd like to talk?
A lot of things. One is the resource of time is really underrated. This will be my 18th chancellor that's coming in next month in 40 years. I've been through a lot of reorganizations and not given enough time to let things prosper. So when you talk about innovation, you know, people want real quick results and they want data that goes through the sky, and it doesn't happen that way. What we see is a little bit increment, and then hopefully a spike maybe into the third year. But a lot of times we don't have 3 years to make these adjustments. So one of the things that worked, again, with Close to Home, which is probably the best collaboration I was involved with in my career, was it's all about the rollout. You know, they had really working groups that really came together. They met all the time with like-minded. They had really dedicated people. We started slow and then picked up some steam. And one of the things about the innovation piece that made that work were the commissioners were directly involved. I can't tell you how many times I go to initiatives, the commissioners come to the first one and you never see them again. Every meeting was run by the commissioner of ACS and the commissioner of probation, every single meeting. If they're coming, their deputies are coming, and people like me, the deputies are all coming together. So they really set the tone. So I think leadership is a big part of innovation, also time. And the third one that was mentioned, I think in a couple of panels, was get focus groups, but especially of the students. We found our students, when we surveyed them, most of their responses were very favorable to us, except for one, and that was academic rigor. They felt that what we were teaching was not challenging enough, and we learned a lot by that. And I put that in the principal's evaluation, and she goes and tells her staff the same thing. So again, tapping into the students because they know best.
Great, all good advice, thank you.
I think Audrey and Tim sort of covered covered really key points that would have been on my list as well. I think the only kind of the idea of community, the idea of making sure that you give time, that you kind of involve the entire community, top to bottom, etc. The only thing I would say that is really, really critical is collaborations don't happen just because a funding agency, private, government, whatever, says it should happen. They happen because there is trust between the partners that what I am doing is going to be helpful to you and what you are doing is going to be helpful to me. And collectively we're going to be addressing this really big issue. So I think the development of the trust is really, really critical in it. And that happens through, allowing people to try out things, to see whether they work, don't, obviously within the context of, you shouldn't ever try out stuff to the level where it harms anybody, but, experiment enough that you feel comfortable in what you're doing and your partners feel comfortable in what you're doing as well. And then I think taking other people's word for the fact that, well, this has worked and let's continue it, and this hasn't worked, let's try something different, instead of always trying to kind of recreate the innovation. So I think those factors have been the ones that when we've supported projects that have kind of built on what has happened before at some level and then added in and expanded them in ways it needed to be, that's where we end up getting the success that we all hope for.
Great, wonderful. So relationships, data, time, leadership, trust, community engagement, all of these things combined and bottled together can create successful collaborative innovation. So thank you for those words. Again, we have a couple of minutes for some audience questions if you have one. While folks are making their way to the microphone, I'm just going to ask our panel again in a word or two. What gives you courage to continue innovating? Anyone who?
I guess the one word that motivates me is hope. I hope that as a system, I believe, that we can get it right. We're close. We're on our way. And as long as we stay committed and believe that we can make the change that's necessary, that we can make the tweaks that's possible, our families will be much better, and we could possibly come close to end violence.
Great.
And to me, it's graduation. As a teacher, I carry around the graduation pictures with me. I show up to the current students and say our whole goal is to get every student to graduate and to reduce the dropout rate.
I think to me it is community, because really is we ultimately all live in a community, and making sure that community is strong is what really makes it all worth doing.
Great, fantastic. It looks like we have a question here.
If I understand how, yeah, it does work. Hello, I'm Britta Holmberg from World Childhood Foundation, Sweden. And I would like to build on what you said, Mr. Hasan, and ask around how we can encourage collaboration even more. Because, well, someone said yesterday, I think, that funders usually have a bird's eye, and we often see organizations that we think should collaborate, and we see how much more impactful the work could be if they would work together. And we also see, for example, in our own government system in Sweden that is supposed to work well, which it does, but also has a lot of flaws, that even government agencies do not work together for many, many reasons, even though we know we're so sure we know that it would be much better if they would. But we know that collaboration, it requires trust, as you said, it requires time. Often there are even kind of legal or different reasons why they do not collaborate, but we also see that sometimes maybe funding, the availability of funding actually is part of the problem, and we see how we and other types of funder are actually contributing to fragmentation, and that the people, the organizations that do their own branding the best, they are the winners for funding. So how do we incentivize collaboration?
I think the very simple answer is with a lot more money, right? And even though we're a foundation and we have money, it's still never enough. But
Money for what? Then?
Pardon? Yeah. No.
Sorry.
But that's one way. I mean, that kind of does help in build it. I think a more realistic approach, at least for a funder, on how a funder can encourage collaboration, is I'd say there are two things. One is, and one I think the New York Community Trust does do well, which is about 90% of what we fund, regardless of the area and the issue, is based on proposals that just come to us because we have an open door policy. Every day of the week, a new proposal arrives at the trust for something, you know. That's the good news. It is also obviously the bad news, because every day of the week a new proposal arrives and we don't have enough money to do everything that arrives. But I think keeping an open mind, I think the lesson from there for the funder is that the community often knows really what needs to happen. Our part, as I said in the very beginning, is a little bit to help, kind of grease the process to make it happen. And then the second thing, I think, is to be really, really honest in the feedback from the funder perspective of what is our expectation of the collaboration. And as funders, just like organizations and government all end up reporting to entities, we report to a board. And it is really great when our board's vision matches the vision of the community. But unless we are very upfront as to what we would like ultimately out of the collaboration, all the money in the world isn't going to necessarily get to meeting kind of the funder goal. Hopefully the funder goal matches very much the community's goal, but where things go all helter-skelter is when we're looking to achieve A and the community is looking to achieve B, and we only find out about that at the end of the whole process. So that very early dialogue on what do we view as success, I think there's a lot to move forward than a collaboration with then the right partners for the right things.
Any other thoughts from our panelists on this idea of overcoming barriers to spur more collaboration? I think we've heard a lot about the opportunity from Mr. Hasan, but as we think about lack of time, lack of trust, lack of resources, and some of the other barriers that were mentioned, anything else that you'd add to this conversation?
I mean, I would say that collaboration is working smart and not harder, right? Mm-hmm. We have the same family, right, is gracing our doors, that's going to within the education system, maybe in passages that may be in ACS. And shared goals, shared interests, shared vision for that family, right? We want them to succeed. So pooling our resources so that, one, it works for the family so that that collaboration may just take one step or have them do one less thing that's on their list of things to do. And we're all invested in the same thing. That young person that completes probation and graduates high school, whose mother's now out of the child welfare system, we all win. So that collaboration, we're working with the same families, and it just seems like we should just be working together.
Thank you. I was just going to say we ourselves are victims of a lack of time. So, yeah, I'll give you the last word in a couple sentences.
I'm a school teacher. When a bell rings, I know it's time to...
Well, join me in thanking our panelists. Your insights, I'm sure, will lead to great application for new innovations and collaborations in this room. Thank you.